Every detail in this story comes from the historical record. Tonight, you are going back to Edo, Japan. The year is somewhere around 1730. The city is the largest in the world, and you are one of the people who keeps it alive, though no one will ever write a poem about what you do. You collect human waste for a living, and in Edo, that makes you essential. This channel is still new, and it means a great deal to have you here. If this kind of storytelling helps you sleep, please consider subscribing, liking, and turning on the notification bell. Every subscriber truly helps. All content on this channel is grounded in historical research and current academic understanding. Just relax and feel free to let this play as you drift off to sleep. Now, let us step into this moment. You are 26 years old. Your name is something simple, a name given by your father, who did this same work before you, as his father did before him. You live in the Honjo district, on the eastern bank of the Sumida River, in a low neighborhood of narrow lanes and close-built houses where the smell of the river mixes with the smell of everything else. Your home is a single room, 6 tatami mats wide. You share a wall with your neighbor on the left and your neighbor on the right. In the mornings, you can hear them breathing. You are not a poor man exactly, but you are not a man with choices either. Your father left you the root. That is the word for it, the root. A collection of households, shops, inns, and tea houses that have agreed in writing to give their waste to you and no one else. The root is a business. The root has value. Men have borrowed against their roots, sold their roots, passed their roots to their children like a plot of land or a set of tools. Your route covers 11 blocks of Hanjo, 43 households, and 2 small inns near the river. You have held it for 6 years, since your father's knees gave out and he could no longer carry the barrels up and down the narrow stairs. You did not choose this, but you did not refuse it either. This is the reality of Edo in 1730. The city has somewhere between 1 million and 1.3 million people living inside it. More than London, more than Paris, more than any other city on earth at this moment in history. 1 million people eating rice and fish and pickled vegetables every day, every night, in wooden buildings packed so close together that a fire in one neighborhood can consume 100 city blocks before the wind changes. The Tokugawa shogunate has governed Japan from Edo Castle for over a century. The samurai class sits at the top of the social order, followed by farmers, then artisans, then merchants. Below all of them, in a category that is difficult to name cleanly, are people like you. People who do the work that makes a city function, but that the social structure would prefer not to look at too directly. You are not outcast. That distinction matters, and you know it. The Ita and Hinin, the hereditary outcasta groups who handle the dead, the leather, the worst of the worst, live in their own designated areas and carry a legal stigma that follows them into every transaction of their lives. You are not that. You pay taxes, you carry a guild card. You have the right to refuse a new customer if you judge the route too long. But you are also not someone who is invited to sit at the front of the room. What you are, in the economic language of Edo, is a shimogoya, a night soil merchant. And the reason that word is merchant and not servant is this: the waste you collect is worth money, real money, substantial money. The farmers outside Edo, in the villages of Musashino, along the flat agricultural plains stretching west and south of the city, need fertilizer. Japan has almost no cattle. There are no draft animals plowing fields on the European scale, no vast herds leaving manure across the countryside. What the Japanese farmer has in extraordinary quantities is human waste from the cities, and that waste, properly collected and applied, will grow the rice and the vegetables and the radishes that come back into the city the following season. This is the loop. You collect the waste from the city. You sell it to the farmers. The farmers grow the food. The food comes back to the city. The city produces more waste. You collect it. You are not a servant in this system. You are a node. This morning begins as all mornings begin. Before the light is fully up, before the neighborhood stirs, you rise in the dark, and you do not light a lamp. You know the room by feel. Your feet find the floor, your hand finds the post. Your body moves through the familiar angles of a space you have lived in for 6 years. You dress in layers. The outer layer is rough cotton, dark dyed, without decoration. It is not a uniform exactly, but it functions like one. Everyone in this work dresses similarly, and everyone in the city knows what it means. The cloth is thick around the wrists and ankles, tied close. You have learned over the years that loose cloth is a problem. Loose cloth catches, loose cloth trails. You move through tight spaces and you carry things that require your full attention, and so everything you wear is as close to your body as you can manage. Your tools are outside the front door, where they always are. A carrying pole of dense hardwood, hinoki, Japanese cypress, approximately 5 feet long and slightly bowed, so that the weight hangs below the center and does not pull sideways when you walk. 2 wooden barrels, coopered from cedar, each holding approximately 48 liters when full. Iron rings at the tops, rope handles threaded through. The barrels are dark with use. You have had them for 4 years. You know their weight empty, and you know their weight full, and you know the difference by the way your spine feels at the end of the day. You lift the pole across your shoulders. Empty, the whole rig weighs perhaps 8 kilograms. Full, it will weigh close to 105. That is not unusual. That is a normal morning. The lane outside your door is narrow, perhaps 2 meters wide, packed earth that has been hardened by 10,000 feet over 10,000 mornings. At this hour it is quiet. A dog moves somewhere in the dark. A cat sits on a low wall and watches you without interest. You turn left and begin to walk. The first stop is always the Tanaka household, 2 lanes east and 1 lane south. You have had this route for 6 years, and you have collected from the Tanaka household every single one of those years, and in all that time you have never once entered through the front door. That is not how this works. You go around the back, through the narrow gap between the building and the wall, to the wooden enclosure at the rear of the property where the benjo, the toilet, sits over a shallow collection pit. The Tanaka household is a family of 6. 2 adults, 4 children, a grandmother who has not been well this winter. 6 people generating waste on a regular schedule. You have developed over years an accurate sense of how much to expect from each stop on your route. You set the carrying pole against the wall and take the smaller bucket, the transfer bucket, half the size of your carrying barrels, and open the hatch at the base of the collection pit. The smell is not a problem. This is the thing that people who do not do this work do not understand. The smell was a problem on the first day, and on the second day, and for some weeks after. Then it became simply a condition of the morning, like cold air or low light. Your body adapted. Your mind adapted. You work now with the same focused attention that a carpenter brings to a joint or a fisherman brings to a net, and the smell is simply part of the material you are working with. You transfer the contents of the pit into the transfer bucket, and from the transfer bucket into the near barrel. You work efficiently. There is no reason to linger. The technique is one your father taught you. Always lead with the transfer bucket. Never fill the carrying barrels directly from a deep pit, because a deep pit in a narrow space means you cannot get the right angle, and a bad angle means spills, and spills mean extra time and the loss of product you have already paid for. The Tanaka waste is worth money. In the economic system of Edo, the city's households do not pay to have their waste removed. In fact, the reverse is true. The night soil collector pays the household for the right to collect. You pay the Tanaka family approximately 300 man per year, roughly equivalent to the price of 15 or 20 bowls of soba noodles at a street stall, for the right to come to their back gate every morning and take away what they have produced. This arrangement seems backward until you understand the fertilizer market. The farmers outside Edo pay you. What you collect from 43 households and 2 inns and sell to the farmers of Musashino more than covers what you pay your clients for the privilege of collecting. You are operating a business with 2 revenue streams pointing in opposite directions, and you profit from the difference. But the margin is not large. The market is competitive. There are other night soil merchants working routes in Honjo, and they know what you know. And if you raise your prices to the farmers will find someone else. And if you lower what you pay the households, some other collector will offer more, and the household will switch their contract. You exist inside a pressure system that has been calibrated by 10,000 small negotiations over many decades, and the pressure is constant. You finish the Tanaka collection and replace the hatch and close the enclosure and lift your pole. The barrels are perhaps a third full now. You feel the weight shift as you settle the pole across your shoulders, and you adjust your balance and begin to walk. The second stop is the Mori boarding house. 6 single men, mostly craftsmen, a carpenter, 2 plasterers, a man who makes sandals from rice straw. The Mori collection is always generous. Single men who eat well and work physical labor produce more than a family that is watching its rice. You have noticed this over the years without anyone having to explain it to you. It is simply a pattern you have observed, like a fisherman learning to read the current. At the Mori house, the collection hatch is around the left side of the building, and the owner, an older man named Morijiro, is already up and moving in the kitchen above you. You can hear the sound of the fire being started, the scrape of iron on clay. He does not come down. He has never come down in 6 years. You appear at his back gate, you collect, you leave. This is the arrangement, and everyone is comfortable with it. You fill the near barrel to about 2/3. The weight across your shoulders is now significant. You have walked perhaps 600 meters. You have 38 more stops to complete. The sky is beginning to lighten at the eastern edge, over the river. Not sunrise yet, just the absence of the deepest dark. The city is beginning to wake. You can hear it as a low-frequency hum beneath the individual sounds, a city sound that is made of fires being started, children being woken, doors being slid open, water being drawn from wells. The city is waking around you. You move through it invisibly. That is not a complaint. It is simply accurate. You have the uniform of your trade, and you carry the tools of your trade, and you move through the city at an hour when most people are still inside. and the ones who are outside are focused on their own business. You are part of the infrastructure of the city, like the drainage channels along the lane edges or the well at the end of the block. And infrastructure is not something a city stops to examine. The third stop this morning is more complicated than usual. The household is the Hashimoto Sake Shop, a small retail operation with a back room where the owner's family lives. Normally, this is a straightforward collection, a family of 4, moderate output. But this morning, as you come around the back of the building, you find the collection enclosure locked. This has happened twice before. The first time, the owner's wife had forgotten to unlock it, and you knocked on the back door and she came and opened it, embarrassed. The second time, the owner had been in a dispute with another merchant and had, in some moment of confused anger, switched his contract to a different collector, and then realized his mistake and switched back within a week, sheepish and apologetic. You set down your carrying pole against the wall and stand for a moment. The lock is an iron padlock, the kind sold at the hardware sellers near Nihonbashi Bridge. It is engaged. You try it twice to be certain. It gives nothing. You look at the back door of the shop. There is no light behind it. The sun is not yet fully up. You make a decision that takes no particular thought, because it is the obvious decision. You will come back to the Hashimoto house at the end of the route. If the lock is still on at that point, you will knock and ask. If there is no answer, you will note it in your records and discuss the contract next time you collect the quarterly payment. You lift your pole and continue. This is the administrative reality of your work that people outside it do not consider. You keep records, not written records. You cannot read or write with any fluency, and this is not unusual for a man in your position in Edo in 1730. Literacy in Japan is higher than almost anywhere else in the world at this moment. Buddhist temples have operated Terakoya schools for commoner children for generations, and a significant portion of Edo's population can read printed text. But writing is another matter, and business records that require the kind of precision you need are beyond what you learned in the temple school you attended for 2 winters as a child. What you keep instead are mental records, a map of the route held entirely in your head, with notations attached to each stop, how much they typically produce, which households have irregular schedules, which clients pay late, which ones have been giving you trouble about the quarterly rates. The Hashimoto shop, for example. The wife is reliable, but the husband is erratic. He renegotiated the contract rate twice in the last 3 years. He is the kind of man who reads the market reports at the fish market and decides he knows more than he does. You know the route in your body as much as in your mind. The number of steps between stops, the exact angle at which you must turn your shoulders to get the carrying pole through the gap beside the Ito family's garden wall without scraping the cedar barrel against the stone. The second stop, where the packed earth of the lane is slightly uneven, a frost heave from 3 winters ago that was never repaired, and where you must adjust your gait or risk an unstable load. Your body has memorized this city at ground level, at the level of back gates and collection hatches and narrow lanes, and that knowledge is precise and detailed and entirely your own. By the time you have completed the first 12 stops, the sun is fully up. You can feel it on the back of your neck, weak still in this season, but present. The carrying pole has begun to press into the familiar groove across your shoulders and the back of your neck. You have carried enough weight long enough that the muscles there are dense and hard, visibly different from the shoulders of men who do lighter work. Your hands, gripping the pole ends for balance, are calloused in specific places that a doctor could use to identify your profession. You stop at the end of the fifth lane to adjust the balance of the load. The rear barrel is slightly heavier than the front, and over distance this asymmetry accumulates in your lower back. You shift the position of the pole, slide the rear barrel's rope handle 2 finger widths closer to center, lift again and test the balance. Better. A woman passes you with a basket of vegetables on her arm, going the other direction. She does not look at you. This is normal. You do not take it personally. There is a social grammar to the city, and you understand your place in it. And the grammar says that a woman going to market in the morning does not make eye contact with the night soil collector moving in the opposite direction. This is not cruelty. It is simply the organization of the world as it currently exists, and you have lived in it long enough that the absence of eye contact registers as neutral, the way a stone registers the absence of water. What you notice instead, and what occupies your attention at this part of the morning, is the quality of the route. Today the route is running well. The loads are consistent, which means the households are healthy and eating properly. In winter, collections sometimes run light. Cold weather, illness, people conserving food. In summer they run heavy, and the smell is different in summer, sharper and more urgent, and you work faster in summer because of the heat and because the farmers need delivery before the day gets too warm. Today is neither winter nor summer. Today is the clean edge of the season where the air is cool but not biting, and the loads come up without surprise, and your body is working the way a body should when it has been trained to do exactly this thing. This is not contentment, exactly. Contentment is too interior a word for what you feel during the working hours of the route. What it is, more accurately, is function. You are functioning correctly. The system you are part of is functioning correctly. The city above you and around you and in front of you is functioning correctly, and you are part of that, invisibly and essentially, and that is enough for a morning. You reach the midpoint of your route at the Suzuki Inn, near the western edge of your territory, and you set down the carrying pole and rest. The inn is a modest establishment, 6 guest rooms, a kitchen, a small bath. The owner, a woman in her 50s named Suzuki Tama, runs it alone since her husband died 2 years ago of a fever that went wrong in the chest. She is always awake before you arrive. You can see the smoke from the kitchen fire rising above the roofline when you turn the corner into her lane, and by the time you reach her back gate, she has already unlatched it from the inside. This is one of the small courtesies that accumulate over years of work. Not friendship exactly, but a kind of mutual recognition that has been refined by repetition until it operates automatically. She unlocks the gate. You collect. She sometimes leaves a small covered dish near the gate, not always, and never when the inn has been difficult, but often enough that you have come to notice its presence or absence as a kind of weather report for the week. Today there is a dish. It is covered with a folded cloth. You will eat it later. The Suzuki Inn collection is the largest single stop on your route. 6 guest rooms occupied at varying rates, a kitchen staff of 2, the owner and her daughter who helps on busy nights. On a good week, the inn generates approximately what 8 regular households produce. You have negotiated the Suzuki contract separately from your residential accounts, a quarterly rate based on estimated volume rather than a flat household fee. And the negotiation took 3 meetings and the involvement of a guild mediator before both parties were satisfied. You fill the rear barrel the rest of the way. Now both barrels are at roughly 3/4 capacity. The total weight across your shoulders is somewhere between 70 and 80 kilograms. You have been walking and working for approximately 3 hours. You eat the dish Suzuki Tama left for you. It is cold rice with pickled plum and a piece of dried fish on the side. You eat standing in the lane, looking at the back wall of the inn. The fish is good, better than what you typically buy from the stall near your house. She is a better cook than most, or her supplier is better, or both. You do not sit. Sitting down fully with a loaded pole nearby creates a problem when you have to stand back up. The weight distribution changes, and if you have not balanced the barrels correctly before you set the pole down, the whole assembly can tip when you lift. And tipping with full barrels is an expensive mistake in more than one sense. You have made that mistake once, years ago, and you have not made it since. You eat the rice and the plum and the dried fish, and you think about the Hashimoto lock. The locked gate is not a serious problem yet, but it is the kind of thing that, if it happens a second time without explanation, becomes a contract issue. Your guild, the Shimogoe Nakama, the Night Soil Merchants Guild of Honjo District, has protocols for contract disputes. If a household refuses collection without notice, the merchant has the right to petition the guild office for a formal renegotiation. In practice, this almost never happens. The system runs on quiet mutual interest, and most disputes resolve themselves when both parties remember that they need each other. But the protocols exist, and you know them. The guild itself is one of the structures that makes your work possible and also makes it constrained. The Shimogo Nakama has existed in some form since at least the early 1600s, in the first generations of the Tokugawa period when Edo was still being built, and the question of what to do with the waste of a rapidly growing city was being worked out in real time. The guild controls the routes. It sets the general parameters for contract rates, not fixing them exactly, but establishing floors and ceilings within which individual merchants negotiate. It mediates disputes. It maintains relationships with the farmers' guilds outside the city, who have their own organizational structures and their own negotiating power. You are a member in good standing. You pay your guild dues on time. You attend the quarterly meetings where the route boundaries are reviewed and any overlaps or disputes are resolved. You have served once on a dispute panel, 2 years ago, when two merchants in the neighboring Fukagawa district had a disagreement over a boarding house that sat on the boundary line between their territories. It took 4 hours and the testimony of the boarding house owner and ended with a compromise that neither merchant was fully satisfied with, which the guild elders said was the sign of a fair resolution. You are not a person who attends meetings with enthusiasm, but you attend because not attending costs more than attending does. You put the cloth back over the dish and set it beside the gate for Suzuki Tama to retrieve. You lift the carrying pole. The next 8 stops are residential, families mostly, with a few single-occupant households mixed in. You move through them with the practiced efficiency of a man who has done the same sequence of actions so many times that the actions no longer require thought, only attention. There is a difference between thought and attention. Thought is effortful. Attention is simply being fully present in what you are doing, which for you at this point in your working life requires very little effort. You notice things as you work, not dramatic things. The small grammar of the neighborhood in the morning. At the Kato house, the collection was light this week. Perhaps someone is ill or traveling. At the Yamamoto household, the collection ran heavier than usual and smelled of what you have learned to recognize as excess rice and fish, which means the family has been eating well, which means there was probably a celebration of some kind, a birthday, a good business week, a visiting relative. You do not know this the way a neighbor would know it. You know it the way a river knows the watershed above it, indirectly through what comes down. The city lives in its waste, and you read it every morning. By the time you complete the residential section of the route, both barrels are full, not overflowing. You have learned over the years to judge capacity by weight and sound, tapping the cedar sides the way a cooper tests a barrel, and you know by feel when you are approaching the limit. You do not overfill. Overfilling means you cannot seal the lids securely, which means the risk of spillage during transport, which means the loss of product and the kind of incident in a city lane that creates social friction you do not need. You are approximately 6 kilometers from the river landing. The route back to the river is different from the route of collection. On the way out, you move through the neighborhood, turning and doubling back, threading the narrow lanes in the order that minimizes walking distance between stops. On the way back, you walk in a straight line, or as close to a straight line as the layout of Edo permits, which is not very straight. The city is a tangle of districts and waterways and bridge approaches and the deliberate disorder of streets that the shogunate built irregular partly to slow an invading army and partly because the city grew without a single controlling plan, each district developing according to its own logic, until the whole thing became a maze that only its inhabitants understand. You understand your section of it completely. You know every shortcut, every passage through a temple ground that shaves 3 minutes off a trip, every bridge approach where the planking is loose and you must step carefully with a full load. You know the city the way a person knows their own body, not by thinking about it, but by having lived in it long enough that the knowledge has moved out of the mind and into the feet. The carrying weight across your shoulders is now close to 100 kilograms, counting the barrels and the load. This is normal. This is a normal morning. Your back will ache tonight, as it aches every night. This is also normal. You have slept with this ache every night for 6 years, and the ache is not a warning anymore. It is simply the signal that the day's work was completed. You cross the Honjo Bridge over the Tatekawa Canal at mid-morning. The bridge is busy at this hour. Merchants' carts, women with carrying baskets, 2 samurai retainers walking in the direction of the Eitai Bridge, their lacquered swords visible at their sides. You move to the left of the bridge planking, which is the side allocated by unspoken convention to working people carrying loads, and you cross without incident. The samurai retainers do not look at you. You do not look at them. This is not submission exactly, though the social structure of the Tokugawa period would describe it in those terms. It is more the mutual non-attention of 2 kinds of people who understand that they occupy very different locations in a shared system and who have found the easiest way to occupy the same bridge without incident. The retainers are there to carry out the business of their lord. You are there to carry out the business of the city's farmers. Both of you need to cross the bridge. The bridge is wide enough. The morning continues. The river landing is a wooden dock on the western bank of the Tatekawa, where the canal meets the wider Sumida. This is your landing, not yours exclusively, but the landing associated with the Honjo District's Night Soil Merchants Guild, and you have rights to it 3 mornings a week under the rotation schedule established by the Guild's Landing Committee. Today is one of your mornings. There are already 2 other merchants at the landing when you arrive. One you know well, Fuji, a man perhaps 5 years older than you, who has the route directly south of yours. He is in the middle of decanting his barrels into a larger river vessel, a wide, flat-bottomed boat capable of carrying perhaps 20 full barrels at once. The boat belongs to Kawamoto, a river trader who contracts with the guild to transport the waste upriver to the farming villages. The other merchant you recognize but do not know by name. He works the north end of Honjo. You have seen him at guild meetings. He nods at you as you approach the dock, and you nod back, and that is the full extent of your exchange. You set your carrying pole down at the edge of the dock and begin the transfer. The river vessel rocks gently on the canal water. The current here is mild. The Teitkawa is a secondary canal, not the main Sumida, and the flow is slow and brownish-green. The morning light falls flat and clear on the water's surface. Somewhere on the far bank, a child is shouting something, the specific words lost across the distance. You pour the contents of the first barrel into the nearest of the river vessel's large tanks, cedar tanks reinforced with iron bands sunk below the deck level so that the center of gravity stays low and the boat does not tip in the main river current. You work carefully. The river Kawamoto is not a man who tolerates careless work at his dock. He has a contract with the guild, but he also has standards, and the standards are reasonable, and you have never given him a reason to complain. Officer. The water moves quietly below the dock planking. A ripple expands from nowhere and crosses the canal's surface and disappears against the far bank. You finish the first barrel. You move to the second. Fuji, working beside you, finishes his decanting and begins rinsing his barrels with canal water from a bucket on a rope. You will do the same when you finish. The rinsing is important, not for cleanliness in any thorough sense. That would require more than a bucket of canal water, but to reduce residue and smell, and to preserve the cedar from the long-term damage that comes from allowing waste to dry and harden inside the wood. The Hashimoto place, you say to Fuji, not a question, not an accusation, just a name offered into the morning air. Fuji rinses his barrel and considers. I heard the wife went to her mother's. This is more information than you expected. You look at him. Her mother is sick, Fuji says. In Ueno, she took the children. The husband alone in the shop then. The husband who renegotiates contracts and locks gates without telling people. Was he supposed to tell me, you ask? He was supposed to tell someone, Fuji says, which is not an answer but is accurate. You finish decanting the second barrel. The river vessel is now about a third full. You and Fuji and the North End merchant have together loaded perhaps 7 barrels worth of material, and Kawamoto or his son will collect 2 or 3 more loads before they make the run upriver this afternoon. The run upriver goes to 3 villages. You do not know the names of the farmers personally, though you have met the purchasing agent for the nearest village, a compact man named Taro something, who comes to the landing once a month to inspect loads and settle accounts. He is a careful man with numbers. He weighs the loads. He has, on 2 occasions, disputed the weight, and he has been right both times and paid accordingly. The fertilizer the farmers receive from you is called shimogo, lower fertilizer, as opposed to the composted plant waste, which is kamigo. Upper fertilizer, shimogo, is more potent. The nitrogen content of human waste is approximately 4 times higher than that of cattle dung. Which is why, in the absence of large domestic animals, Japan developed this system to an extraordinary degree of sophistications. The farmers know this. The quality of shimogo varies by source. Households that eat well produce more nutritious waste than households that are hungry, and the farmers of Musashino, who are sophisticated in their agricultural knowledge, understand this perfectly well and pay accordingly. The in-waste, your Suzuki collection, commands a slight premium. Travelers eat well. Travelers eat variety. The waste of a well-fed traveler, filtered through the intelligence of an experienced farmer, produces better rice than the waste of someone who has eaten nothing but thin barley gruel all winter. You know all of this, and you do not find it remarkable. It is simply how the system works. You rinse your barrels. You coil the rope handles carefully. You rest the empty barrels upright in the sun for a few minutes. They will dry faster on a day like this than on a cloudy day. And dry barrels are lighter barrels, and lighter barrels are easier to carry back to the neighborhood for the afternoon's work. But the afternoon's work is not yet. The morning is the heavy work. The afternoon is the secondary work, the route servicing the two inns more thoroughly, checking in on the 3 or 4 households that had reported irregular schedules, collecting the quarterly payment from the Mori boarding house which is due this week and which you have not yet received. For now you are at the landing, in the clean morning air beside the canal, with empty barrels and a third of the day still ahead of you. Fuji has loaded his pole and is preparing to leave. The Hashimoto man, he says, as a parting observation rather than advice. He's the kind who lets things pile up and then gets upset that things have piled up. You know the type. Every route has one. I'll knock this afternoon, you say. Fuji nods. He lifts his pole and his empty barrels and walks up the dock ramp without looking back, already thinking about his next task. This is the character of people in your profession. You do not dwell. Dwelling is for people with time to spare, and time is the one resource that is always in short supply on a route. You look at the canal for another moment. The flat-bottomed river vessel rocks gently at its moorings. Kawamoto's son, a boy of about 15, uninterested in everything, is sweeping the dock planking with a reed broom, moving the debris toward the water's edge. A cormorant lands on a post 10 meters away and looks at the water with the focused patience of an animal that knows exactly what it is doing. You lift your carrying pole. The barrels are empty and light, and the morning has that quality of accomplished work, not finished, but significantly advanced. You begin the walk back through the city toward your neighborhood. The lanes are busier now. The morning market is at full run. The vegetable sellers and the tofu makers and the fish stalls all operating at their peak hour. You navigate through this traffic with the automatic skill of long practice. The carrying pole requires a wider clearance than a single body, and you have learned to thread through crowded lanes with the same attention a boat pilot gives to shallow water, not looking for trouble, not creating it, moving through. At the vegetable seller near the corner of the second lane, a man you know by sight, a carpenter from the Ito household, one of your route stops, is buying burdock root. He sees you coming and moves his basket without being asked, creating space for you to pass. This is courtesy, the kind that exists at the edge of a social hierarchy. You are both commoners, but he is a skilled craftsman and you are a night soil merchant, and the difference is registered in his gesture without either of you having to acknowledge it. You pass without comment. This is not bitterness. It is simply the texture of the day. The city lives in texture, not in the broad strokes that history books describe, not in the policies of the shogunate, not in the philosophical debates of the Confucian scholars at the domain schools, not in the drama of the kabuki theater or the precise poetry of the haiku masters. The city lives in the exact weight of a carrying pole across your shoulders at the midpoint of a morning route, in the sound of a canal gate opening, in the smell of cedar barrels rinsing in river water, in the precise angle of late autumn sunlight on the back wall of an inn you have collected from every morning for 6 years. This is the city you live in, not the city in the woodblock prints, with their elegant compositions and their noble figures. The city under the prints, the city that makes the prints possible. You walk back into Honjo as the morning market reaches its peak. The sound is extraordinary. Fish sellers calling their prices, children running through the lanes on errands, the rhythmic knock of a carpenter's mallet somewhere above and to the left, a woman arguing with a fabric seller about a price she considers insulting. All of this happens continuously, simultaneously, without coordination, and the result is something that is not chaos exactly, but is not order either. It is the sound of 1 million people being alive at the same time in a small space, and you have been hearing it every morning of your working life, and it is simply the sound of the world. You turn left at the temple gate and head toward your home. The cedar barrels knock gently against each other as you walk, a hollow percussion that marks your passage through the lanes. 2 small children sitting on a step watch you go past with the open, undefended stare that children direct at things they find interesting. You do not know if they find you interesting or the barrels interesting, or simply the sight of a man moving with purpose through their lane. It does not matter. You nod at them, which surprises them, and one of them raises a hand in a small, uncertain wave, and you are already past them and around the corner before anything further can develop. Hasit. The barrels are empty and light on the pole. Your shoulders carry the weight easily now. Home is 6 minutes away. You have been working for approximately 4 hours. You have collected from 31 of your 43 regular stops. You have delivered a full load to the river landing. You have eaten cold rice and dried fish beside a canal. You have had a brief conversation about a locked gate and the character of a man who locks gates. A normal morning in Edo. The year is approximately 1730. The city around you is the largest and most complex urban system in the world, and you are one of the essential mechanisms by which it functions. And no one will ever write this down exactly, but the fields outside the city will grow their rice all the same. You are home for perhaps 40 minutes. This is the rest you allow yourself between the morning route and the afternoon work. 40 minutes, sometimes less. On days when the morning ran long, a blocked collection hatch, a dispute at the landing, rain that made the lanes slow. The rest compresses to 20 minutes or disappears entirely. On days when the morning ran clean and fast, you might stretch it to an hour. Today was clean. You have 40 minutes. Your room is 6 tatami mats. You know the exact dimensions because you have slept in it long enough that your body knows where the walls are in the dark. The tatami are old. You replaced 2 of them 3 years ago when the straw beneath began to soften and collapse, but the other 4 are original to when you moved in, and they carry the compressed history of years of use in their surface, the slight discoloration near the door where you always set down your sandals, the faint indentation near the north wall where you always sleep. You set the carrying pole and the empty barrels outside the door in their usual place. You remove your outer layer, the dark work cotton, and hang it on the peg near the entrance. Underneath is a lighter layer, sweat damp from the morning. You leave this on. There is no point changing what you will simply put back on in 40 minutes. You sit on the tatami near the small clay brazier in the center of the room. The brazier holds a low fire. You banked it before you left this morning, a habit so old it requires no thought. You add 2 small pieces of charcoal from the wooden box beside it and wait for the heat to build. The tea is already made from this morning, cold now, in the ceramic cup you have had since you were 20, a plain cup with no glazed decoration, the kind that costs almost nothing and lasts almost forever if you are careful with it. You drink the cold tea. It is green and slightly bitter, and it does the thing tea is supposed to do, which in this moment is simply to give your hands something to hold while the rest of you is still. Outside your wall, your left side neighbor, a woman who makes paper lanterns for a wholesale shop, is working. You can hear the soft repeated sound of her tools, a papery whisper, continuous, unhurried. She has been making lanterns in that room for as long as you have lived here. You have spoken to her perhaps 30 times in 6 years. You know her name is Ume, that she has a son who works at a dyer's in Fukagawa, that she dislikes the smell of the river in summer and keeps her window shuttered from the 5th month to the 8th. These facts came to you gradually, in fragments, over years, without intention. You did not try to know them. You simply know them the way you know the slight unevenness in the Kato lane, by proximity and repetition. You close your eyes for a moment. This is not sleep. You do not sleep in the middle of the day. What you do is allow the body to be motionless for a period of time, while the mind runs quietly over the second half of the route, checking the sequence the way a carpenter checks the grain of a board before cutting. The afternoon route is shorter than the morning route in terms of stops, only 12, but more complicated in terms of tasks. 3 of the 12 require the additional work of clearing partially blocked collection hatches, which have been reported by the household members but which you have not yet attended to. The Mori boarding house payment, the Hashimoto situation. You open your eyes and look at the brazier. The charcoal has caught. The room is beginning to warm slightly at its center. Outside, the lantern maker's tools continue their soft rhythm. 40 minutes. You drink the last of the cold tea and set the cup down carefully and stand. The afternoon carrying pole is lighter, not a different pole, but fitted with smaller barrels for the afternoon's partial collections, which do not require the full capacity of the morning setup. The smaller barrels weigh perhaps 1/3 less when full. This matters by the end of a full working day in ways that the beginning of the day does not anticipate. You put on the outer layer again. You lift the afternoon pole. You step into the lane. The afternoon city is different from the morning city in ways that are difficult to describe precisely, but that you feel clearly in your body. The morning city is purposeful, everyone moving toward something, the market opening, the workshops starting, the deliveries being made. The afternoon city is in the middle of things. The market has settled into its steady rhythm. The craftsmen are at work and will be at work until the light fails. The children who were at the Terakoya school in the morning have been released and are in the lanes in clusters, chasing each other, calling out, doing the things children do when no one is specifically supervising them. You navigate through all of this with the same automatic competence as the morning. The first afternoon stop is the Nakamura household, 3 lanes west of your home. The Nakamura family is large. A husband and wife, the husband's elderly parents, 4 children of various ages, a young apprentice from Osaka who is learning the husband's trade as a tatami maker. 9 people in a household that was built for 6. The collection hatch at the Nakamura house is a problem. It has been a problem for 2 years. The hatch is positioned against the building's rear foundation wall in a corner that does not drain well, and in wet seasons the ground around it becomes soft, and the hatch cover, old wood, not replaced when it should have been, has warped in the damp and no longer closes fully. This means that in wet seasons the pit beneath the hatch gets diluted, which is a problem for 2 reasons. The first is practical. Diluted waste is heavier to carry and less valuable to the farmers, who are paying for concentrated shimugo, not for water. The second is social. The warped hatch lets smell out in a way that a properly sealed hatch does not, and the Nakamura neighbors have complained about this twice, and both times the complaint has eventually reached you through the guild's informal network of complaints. You have told Nakamura Hiroshi 3 times that he needs to replace the hatch. Replacing the hatch costs approximately 200 mon, which is not nothing for a tatami maker with 4 children, but it is also not impossible. He has agreed each time and not done it. Today you do the collection, and then, because the hatch cover is sitting at a worse angle than last time, you take it off entirely and examine the wood. The rot has progressed significantly since you last checked. The wood is soft at the edges now, dark with moisture, and in 2 places you can press your thumb into it and feel the fibers give in a way that means the cover will not last another wet season. You go to the back door of the Nakamura house and knock. This is unusual. You almost never knock on back doors. The social arrangement of your work is that you appear, collect, and leave without requiring the household to interact with you unless they wish to. Knocking on the back door is a different kind of presence. It means something needs to be said. Nakamura Hiroshi opens the door. He is a compact man, younger than you by a few years, with the calloused hands of someone who works with needle and thread and tight corners all day. He looks at you with the expression of a man who already suspects what he is about to hear. You hold up the hatch cover. He looks at it. He looks at you. By the next rain, you say, not a request, a statement of what is required. He looks at the hatch cover again. He sighs in the way that men sigh when they know they have been correctly assessed. I'll go to the lumber yard this week, he says. Before the next rain, you say again. Before the next rain, he confirms. You replace the hatch cover as best you can, angled so that the more solid section faces up, and collect and move on. You have had this exact conversation in different forms with different households about different maintenance problems, perhaps 40 times over the course of your working life. The content varies. The structure is always the same. Something is failing. You point to what is failing. The household agrees to fix it. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, and you have the conversation again a season later with slightly more emphasis. This is part of the work that does not appear in any description of the work. The work is not only collection, the work is also the maintenance of the infrastructure that makes collection possible. The hatches, the pits, the pathways through which you navigate, the contracts that govern the whole arrangement. You are not responsible for the Nakamura hatch cover in any legal sense, but you are affected by it, and so in a practical sense it is your problem as much as his. The second afternoon stop is the Goto household, which has a different kind of problem. The Goto family consists of an elderly couple. The husband is perhaps 70, the wife perhaps 65, and their unmarried daughter, who is in her 30s and who manages the household with the focused efficiency of someone who has been managing it for a long time. The daughter's name is Goto Sachi, and she is the person you actually deal with at this stop, because the elderly husband is largely confined to the interior of the house, and the wife is partially deaf, and the daughter handles everything that happens at the back of the property. The Goto problem is not a maintenance problem. The Goto problem is a scheduling problem. The daughter has been asking you, for the past month, to shift the collection time at their stop from early morning to mid-morning because the elderly husband has difficulty sleeping and often uses the benjo between the hours of 3 and 5 in the morning, and she is concerned that your arrival before dawn disturbs him. You have been thinking about this request for a month. The difficulty is that your route is structured in a way that putting the Goto stop at mid-morning requires restructuring 3 other stops around it, because the Goto house sits at a bend in your route that is most efficiently reached in the early morning approach from the east. Moving it to mid-morning means either backtracking, which adds time and distance, or restructuring the entire eastern section of the route, which would take several days to work out and might create timing conflicts with the Shimogo Nakama's landing rotation schedule. You think about this while you complete the collection and close the hatch and wash your hands at the Goto's back gate water basin. Goto Sachi appears at the back door, as she usually does around the time you are finishing. She is a practical-looking woman with sharp eyes who carries the particular self-possession of someone accustomed to managing things that most people do not want to manage. "Have you thought about the timing?" she asks. "I've been thinking about it," you say. "My father was awake again before dawn last night." "I understand." You dry your hands on the cloth at your waist. "If I move your stop to mid-morning, I need to shift the Ono house and the 2 temple stops. It adds half a block to my afternoon route." She considers this. She is not a person who rushes her considerations. "What would make it worth the extra distance?" she asks. This is a direct question about money, which in the social language of Edo is somewhat unusual from a woman speaking to a tradesperson at a back gate. But Goto Sachi has always been direct, and you have always appreciated this about her. It saves time. "An extra 50 mon per quarter," you say, "for the route adjustment." She looks at you. 50 mon per quarter is approximately the price of 5 bowls of soba. For a household managing an elderly father who cannot sleep, it is not a difficult sum. "Done," she says. You nod. You pick up your pole. You continue down the lane. This is how your business actually runs. Not in the formal quarterly meetings or the guild negotiations, but in these small adjustments at back gates, where 2 people assess a situation and find the number that resolves it and move on. You will note the Goto adjustment in your mental ledger and begin the new schedule on your next collection day. The afternoon continues at the pace of afternoon work. Steady, methodical, slightly slower than the urgency of the morning now that the heavy delivery has already been made. You work through the remaining stops. At the small noodle shop on the 3rd lane, the collection hatch is clean and well maintained. The noodle maker's wife clearly having swept the enclosure since your last visit, a small courtesy that you register without comment. At the Yamada house, a household of 3 that has recently had a new baby, The collection is heavier than usual and carries the particular composition that comes from a nursing mother's household. You know this pattern. Nursing mothers eat more. The household economics of childbirth are visible in the collection data in ways that the household itself might not think about. You do not think about it either, particularly. It is simply part of reading the route. By mid-afternoon, you have completed 11 of the 12 afternoon stops. The 12th is the Hashimoto Sake shop. You approach from the south lane, which is the longer approach, but which brings you to the back gate from a direction that keeps the laneway clear in case you need to set down the pole. The gate is unlocked. You stand for a moment looking at the unlocked gate. Then you open it and go in. The collection enclosure is intact. The hatch is accessible. You complete the collection efficiently and replace the hatch and are preparing to leave when the back door of the shop opens and Hashimoto Kenji appears. He is a man in his mid-40s, broad in the shoulders, with the slightly red face of someone who has been sampling his own inventory. He looks at you with the expression of a man who knows he owes an explanation and is deciding how much of one to give. "My wife went to Ueno," he says. "I know," you say. "She usually handles the gate." "She usually does," you agree. You begin to close the enclosure. "So you came back," he says. There is something in this that is not quite an apology and not quite an acknowledgement. It lands somewhere between them. "It's on my route," you say. He nods. He looks at the enclosure. He looks at you. "The quarterly payment," he says. "I can give you that now if you want." This is unexpected. The quarterly payment is not due for another week. You look at him. "My wife keeps track of these things," he says, which is an explanation of why he is offering now rather than waiting. He knows the payment is coming, and without her here to manage it, he is handling it himself, and he is the kind of man who prefers to deal with things when they are in front of him rather than let them wait. "All right," you say. He goes inside and comes back with a small cloth pouch. You count the contents without making a show of counting them. 360 man, which is the correct amount, plus a small addition that you calculate as approximately 40 man. You look at him. "For the inconvenience this morning," he says. His face is still the face of a man who has not fully decided how to feel about this transaction. But the money is correct, and more than correct. And this tells you what you need to know about the locked gate. It was carelessness, not strategy. He is a man who makes small mistakes and compensates for them with money, which is, in your experience, a manageable kind of client. "Tell your wife I hope her mother recovers," you say. He looks surprised, then he nods. "I will." You put the pouch in your inner pocket and lift your pole and walk back through the gate. Uffa. The lane is quiet in the afternoon light. The shadows have lengthened. Somewhere above you, a crow calls once and goes silent. The afternoon's work is complete. 12 stops, 1 negotiation, 1 resolved dispute, 1 hatch cover discussion, 400 mon collected. A full day by any measurement. You walk home through the back lanes of Honjo as the light begins to angle toward evening. The city around you is shifting its register. The market is winding down. The stall keepers beginning to break down their displays. The cooking fires starting up in the households. The smell of the evening meal beginning to move through the lanes. rice mostly, and the particular smell of dashi broth that means someone is making miso soup, which in Edo in this period means someone is eating dinner. Your own dinner is rice that you cooked this morning before leaving, left in the covered pot on the brazier. It will be warm enough. With it you will have the pickled vegetables from the jar beside the water basin, and whatever dried fish is left from the piece you did not finish at the Suzuki landing. This is a normal dinner. This is the dinner of a working man in Honjo in 1730, who is not prosperous and not destitute, and who has, by the end of a full working day, enough appetite to eat whatever is in the pot, without caring particularly about what it is. You set the carrying pole and the afternoon barrels outside your door. Inside, the room is darker than the lane. The shutters on the small window have been closed since morning, keeping the interior cool and dim. You open them. The evening light comes in at a low angle, falling across the tatami and reaching the near wall. You sit down on the tatami and put your back against the wall and look at the room. The room is what it is. 6 mats, a brazier, a wooden box with tools, a shelf with 2 ceramic cups and a small jar of salt and the pickled vegetable jar, a sleeping pallet rolled against the far wall, a peg near the door with the work layer hanging on it, a pair of sandals, the work sandals and the better sandals which you wear on guild meeting days and market days, and on the 2 or 3 occasions a year when you visit the temple on the ridge above Honjo for the seasonal observance. You do not have much, but the room is yours, and the root is yours, and the 43 households and 2 inns are yours in the sense that a root is a possession, not land, not blood, but a pattern of agreements and relationships that you have maintained and extended over 6 years of daily work. It is worth something. It is worth considerably more than the room. Outside, the lantern maker's tools have gone quiet. Ume is finished for the day. The crow on the rooftop is quiet too. The evening in Edo settles over the rooftops of Honjo like something physical, like cloth laid down slowly. The fires in the household stoves send their smoke up into the cooling air. The sound of the city drops its register from the sharp frequencies of the working day to the lower, more diffuse sounds of the evening, children being called in, a shamisen being played somewhere 2 or 3 lanes away, the voice of a sake seller who still has inventory to move before dark. You close your eyes. Not sleep, not yet, just the end of the day arriving at the pace that ends of days arrive, with the ordinary weight of ordinary work completed. Tomorrow the route begins again. The same lanes, the same gates, the same careful work. The Nakamura hatch cover will either have been replaced or it will not have been. The Goto collection will shift to mid-morning starting next week. The Hashimoto man will eventually cause another small problem and compensate with money, as he always does. The farmers outside the city will receive their delivery from Kawamoto's river vessel sometime tomorrow afternoon, and they will distribute it to the fields, and the fields will do what fields do when they receive what they need. The city does not think about any of this. The city simply continues. Owa. The shamisen 3 lanes away plays one more phrase and stops. The cooking fires send their smoke up. The evening deepens. There is a day, once a month, when you do not collect. This is the guild meeting day. The Shimogo Nakama of Honjo District meets on the 14th day of each month at the guild hall near the Eitai Bridge approach, in a room that smells of old cedar and record paper and the particular dry staleness of a space that is used for formal purposes and aired out infrequently. You arrive before the opening, as you always do, because arriving late to a guild meeting is a statement you are not in a position to make. There are 17 merchants in the Honjo Guild. You know all of them. Some well, some only by reputation and route boundary. The room where you meet is long and low, with wooden benches along the side walls and a raised platform at the north end where the guild elder, a man named Ota Genbei, sits during formal proceedings. Ota Genbei is perhaps 60, with the build of a man who stopped doing the physical work 20 years ago, and the hands of a man who has not forgotten what it felt like. He has run the Honjo Guild for 11 years. He is fair and slow and nearly impossible to fluster, which are exactly the right qualities for the position. You take your seat on the bench beside Fuji, who is already there, eating a rice ball he has apparently brought from home. "Nakamura hatch?" Fuji asks, which means he has heard about the situation through whatever invisible network of information moves through the guild's social layer. "I told him before the next rain," you say. Fuji nods and finishes his rice ball. The other merchants filter in over the next 10 minutes, and then Ota Genbei calls the meeting to order, and you settle into the familiar rhythm of guild business. The Shimogo Nakama of Honjo is one of several hundred trade guilds, Za and Nakama, that operate within Edo under the sanction of the Tokugawa shogunate. The guild system in Japan in this period is not exactly like the guild system of medieval Europe, though the broad structure is similar. The Japanese Nakama operates under a license, a kabu, granted by the city magistrate's office, which authorizes the guild to regulate its trade within a defined territory. In exchange for this monopoly protection, the guild pays a licensing fee, enforces standards of practice among its members, mediates disputes before they reach the magistrate's courts, and keeps records. The kabu system means that your guild membership is not simply professional affiliation, it is a legal right. The kabu for the Honjo Night Soil Merchants Guild represents the right to operate the trade in this district, and it is registered with the city government, and without it no one can legally collect and sell shimogo in Honjo, not even if they have willing clients and willing farmers and a strong back. Your individual membership in the guild, your share of the collective kabu, has a monetary value that can, under certain conditions, be sold or transferred. When your father passed the route to you, he passed not just the list of household contracts, but also his share of the guild's operating license. This is what makes a route more than a job. A route, with its associated guild membership, is a form of property that can be inherited and transferred. You own something. Not land, not a building, but something with legal standing and market value. Ota Genbei opens the meeting with the standard formalities. Attendance noted, last month's minutes confirmed, the licensing fee to the magistrate's office paid and receipt recorded. Then he moves to the first item of real business, which is a boundary dispute between two merchants on the north edge of the district. The dispute involves a tea house that recently expanded its back building into a new lane. The new lane sits ambiguously between two route territories. Both merchants want the tea house. The tea house is a good account, a well-patronized establishment with high traffic, good output, reliable payment. You listen to both merchants present their cases. You have heard variations of this argument before. Route boundary disputes in Edo's night soil trade are almost always about the same thing. A building changed, a lane was extended, a household moved, and the original boundary language of the guild register no longer maps cleanly onto the physical reality of the neighborhood. The neighborhood is always changing. The guild register changes slowly. The gap between them is where disputes live. Ota Genbei listens with his eyes half closed, which is his working expression, not inattention but the particular concentration of a man who is filing information while appearing to rest. When both merchants have finished, he is quiet for a moment. Then he says, "The tea house was built in the Kyo period." He names the year. The lane in question was opened 4 years after that. The boundary language in the register predates the lane, so the lane is not covered. Both merchants look at him. "We will add the new lane to the register with a line drawn from the midpoint of the old Yamamoto house boundary," Ota Genbei continues. "The tea house falls on the eastern side of that line. Tanaka gets the tea house." The merchant named Tanaka looks satisfied. The other merchant looks like a man calculating whether the result is worth arguing with. He decides it is not. The matter is settled. You have watched Ota Genbei resolve disputes this way for 6 years, and what you have learned from watching is that the resolution almost always comes from something specific: a date, a boundary marker, a piece of registered language, rather than from an assessment of which merchant makes a more compelling argument. The guild works because it runs on records, and records are more stable than arguments. After the boundary dispute, there is a discussion about the quarterly rate adjustment for temple accounts. Temples are a different kind of client from residential households. Larger, more complex, with multiple buildings and varying occupancy depending on the religious calendar. The guild negotiates temple rates collectively rather than individually, because the temples have enough institutional weight that individual merchants cannot negotiate effectively against them, and collective bargaining through the guild produces better outcomes. The current proposal is a small increase in the rate the guild charges the 3 Honjo temples for collection rights, the reverse of the residential arrangement where you pay the household. With temples, as with the larger commercial establishments, the power relationship is different, and the direction of payment sometimes reverses. The specific economics depend on the size and volume of the account. You listen to this discussion with attention because 2 of the 3 temples are in your root territory, and whatever the guild decides will affect your quarterly accounts directly. The proposed rate increase is modest, approximately 8%. The temple accounts officer, who has been invited to this portion of the meeting, is a thin man in priestly robes who sits very still and says very little, and radiates the particular energy of a man who is accustomed to institutional patience. The negotiation takes 40 minutes and ends with a rate increase of 5%, which satisfies no one completely and which everyone will live with. This is guild work: slow, specific, unglamorous, essential. After the meeting, you walk back through Honjo with Fuji, who takes the same general direction as you for the first part of the route home. The afternoon is warm enough that the city smell is sharper than it was this morning, and you both adjust your pace instinctively to the slight headwind coming off the river, which is better. "Did you see the Kanda merchants at the Federation meeting?" Fuji asks. "You did not attend the Federation meeting last month. The Shimugo Nakama of Honjo is a member of a larger federation of night soil guilds covering Edo's multiple districts, and the federation meets quarterly to coordinate the overall supply agreement with the agricultural regions. You are not senior enough in the guild to attend federation meetings. That is Otagenbe's domain, but information from those meetings filters down through the guild network within days. What about them, you ask? They're pushing to renegotiate the Musashino rate, Fuji says. The Kanda Guild says the farmers in the northern villages are underpaying. They want a collective rate increase. You consider this. The Musashino agricultural region, the flat plain stretching west and southwest of Edo, is divided among several farming communities, each with their own purchasing agents and their own relationships with specific urban guilds. The Honjo Guild sells primarily to the villages along the river approach to the west. The Kanda Guild, covering the northern districts of the city, sells to the northern Musashino villages. If Kanda renegotiates their rate upward and Honjo does not, the northern farmers might redirect their purchasing toward Honjo suppliers as a cheaper alternative, which would benefit Honjo merchants in the short term, but would destabilize the broader price structure. What does Otosan think, you ask? He thinks Kanda is overreaching, Fuji says. He thinks the farmers will push back, and the whole negotiation will take 6 months and end somewhere near where it started. You nod. This matches your read of how these things go. The conversation ends when your paths diverge near the Honjo Bridge. You walk the last part of the way home alone, through the lanes that are yours in the particular way that familiar places become yours, not by ownership, but by frequency, by the accumulated knowledge of having moved through a space so many times that the space has shaped your body and your body has shaped your understanding of the space. You are home before the sun has moved far past midday. The room is as you left it. The brazier has cooled. You add charcoal and wait for it to catch, and then put the rice pot on, and sit back and think about the rate dispute Fuji mentioned. The agricultural economy of the Edo region is something you understand at the level of practical mechanics rather than theory. You have never studied economics. You have never read an accounting ledger, or not more than the simplest notations. But you understand supply and price and negotiating power from the inside, from having lived inside a system where the price you charge and the price you receive have direct and immediate consequences for whether you can pay your guild dues and your room rent and buy the charcoal that heats your tea. What you understand specifically is that the Shimago trade is more balanced than it appears. On the surface, it looks like a simple extraction. You take waste from the city and sell it to the farmers. But the extraction runs both ways. The farmers need the Shimago because they cannot produce enough fertilizer from any other source to grow the volume of food the city requires. And the city needs the farmers to grow that food because 1 million people cannot feed themselves from within the city's walls. Each side needs the other with roughly equal urgency, and the price is set somewhere in the middle of that mutual urgency, and it has been set there for long enough that everyone has forgotten it was ever set at all. It simply is the price, the way the shape of a river simply is the shape of the river, because that is where the water found its level after running long enough. The Kanda merchants want to move that price. They may be right that the northern village rate is below market, or they may simply be ambitious. You cannot tell from this distance. You eat your midday meal, the rice, now hot with the pickled vegetables and the last of the dried fish, and think about the farmers. You have met 3 of them in the 6 years of your route. Not the field workers, but the purchasing agents who come to the river landing to inspect and weigh the loads. Taro something from the nearest village. A quiet older man from the second village who always wears the same brown hari jacket and who counts his coin twice before handing it over. A younger man from the third village who asked you, the first time you met, what the city smelled like in summer, and when you told him, he laughed in the way that people laugh when they expected one answer and received another. What you know about the farming life from those meetings and from the things Kawamoto's rivermen have mentioned over the years is roughly this. The Musashino Plain is good agricultural land, flat, well-watered, with soil that has been cultivated for generations. But it is not land that can produce at the level the farmers need without consistent fertilization. Japan in this period does not have the European option of leaving fields fallow to recover. The population pressure is too high, the arable land too limited. Fields must produce every year, and producing every year without chemical replacement means that the soil's nitrogen content must be actively maintained, and shimogo is how you maintain it. A good application of shimogo to a rice paddy in spring can increase the yield by 30 to 40% compared to an unfertilized field. This is not a small difference. This is the difference between a village that feeds itself and has surplus to sell and a village that barely gets through the year. The farmers know this with the specificity that people know things when those things determine whether their families eat. And so they come to the river landing, and they weigh the barrels and they count the mon carefully. And the price is what it is because both sides need the arrangement to continue, and the arrangement has continued, with adjustments for more than a century. You finish the rice. The afternoon is open. No collection today, no root work. This is unusual. Guild meeting days are the one scheduled day of freedom in the monthly cycle, and you have learned to use them for the tasks that the regular rhythm of work does not accommodate. There is a sandal sole that needs replacing. The rope handle on the smaller carrying barrel has been fraying at one end for 2 weeks and has reached the point where it needs to be rethreaded before it fails at a bad moment. The guild dues record needs to be checked against what you remember paying. Not because you distrust the guild's accounting, but because it is your money and you are the person responsible for tracking it. You do the sandal first, because the cobbler near the South Temple closes early on guild meeting days, and you need to get there before the afternoon runs away from you. The cobbler's name is Matsu, a small man of perhaps 50, with eyesight that seems too poor for his work until you watch him with a piece of leather in his hands, at which point the precision of his movements makes it clear that he reads the material through his fingers rather than his eyes. He is the cobbler you have used for 4 years, since the previous cobbler moved his shop to Fukagawa. He looks at your sandal sole and makes the noise that cobblers make when they are deciding how much to charge. When did these start going? He asks. 2 months, you say. You should have come 2 months ago, he says, which is what he always says. He gives you a price for the repair and you negotiate it down by 10 mon, which he accepts without particular resistance, and he tells you to come back before the evening bell. You walk back through the afternoon lanes of Hanjo with the particular lightness of a day without the carrying pole, which is more noticeable than you expect, even after years of alternating between carrying days and non-carrying days. Your shoulders know the difference. Your spine knows the difference. Your feet, on the hard-packed lanes, move with a slightly different rhythm without the weight overhead, pressing each step more firmly into the earth. You stop at the hardware stall near the Itai Bridge approach and buy new rope for the barrel handle. The rope seller, a woman who runs the stall with her teenage son, wraps the length you need in a piece of cloth and ties it with a string. You put it in your inner pocket with the remaining guild meeting notes you have been holding in your head. On the way back, you pass the entrance to a public bath, a sento, one of several in the Honjo district. You will go tonight, as you go every 3 or 4 days, because the work requires it, and because the bath is one of the genuine pleasures of city life at your level of it, the one daily luxury that is affordable and universal. In Edo in 1730, there are perhaps 600 public baths operating within the city limits. They are the social infrastructure of the commoner class, the place where news is exchanged, where arguments are settled, where the daily life of the city flows through in warm water and steam. For you, the bath is also practical. The work leaves traces that cold water and a cloth cannot fully address. The sento's hot water, the wooden scrubbing tools, the other men in the bath who do not comment on what you do for a living because everyone in a communal bath is equally without their social markers, equally reduced to the basic fact of being a body that needs cleaning. All of this is simply necessary and also, in a quiet way, good. You think about the bath as you walk back to your room in the early afternoon. You rethread the barrel rope. The work is methodical, pulling the old frayed end through the iron ring, measuring the new rope against the length you need, threading it, tying the specific knot your father taught you that holds under lateral stress. It takes perhaps 20 minutes. When it is done, the barrel is as it should be, and you set it outside with the rest of the equipment and come back inside. The room is warm now. From the midday sun on the walls, you sit on the tatami and let the warmth come in from the shuttered window and do the mental accounting of the month. Guild dues paid, quarterly collections received, the Goto adjustment coming, the Hashimoto extra 40 man in the pouch that is the difference between this month and last month. You are not ahead exactly, but you are not behind. This is the steady state of your life, not poverty, not prosperity, a calibrated sufficiency that requires constant maintenance. Every quarter recalibrated against what the route produces and what the city costs. And that would collapse if the route collapsed, but that holds as long as the route holds. And the route has held for 6 years and shows no particular signs of not continuing to hold. A sigh. Outside, the afternoon city makes its afternoon sounds. A temple bell in the distance, striking the hour. The sun moves across the tatami. You go to retrieve your sandals before Matsu closes. On the way back, with the repaired sandals in your hand and the evening beginning to settle its cooler register over the city, you stop for a moment at the top of the Honjo Bridge over the Tatekawa. The canal below is catching the late light. The water is brown-green and still, the surface barely moving. A flat-bottomed boat moves slowly southward, loaded with something. Bales, possibly, or barrels, you cannot tell at this distance. The boatman stands at the stern and poles with the long, slow strokes that move a heavy boat on still water. You watch him for a moment. The canal connects to the Sumida. The Sumida connects to the bay. The bay connects to everything beyond. Though for you and for most of the people in Honjo, the bay is essentially theoretical, present in the smell of fish and the direction of certain winds, and in the fact that goods come from it and go to it, but not a place you have stood. You have not been to the bay. You have not been outside Edo. You have not, in truth, been more than perhaps 3 or 4 kilometers from this bridge in the last 6 years of your working life. This is not unusual. This is the geography of a commoner's life in Edo. The city is enormous, and most people live their entire working lives within a small radius of their home. The world outside Edo is present in the form of goods: the rice from Musashino, the fish from the bay, the timber from the mountain regions to the north. But it is not present as experienced space. It is present as the source of things. The riverboat disappears around the bend in the canal. You put the sandals on and walk home. The bath is at the 7th hour by custom, the hour when the working day has ended and the men of the neighborhood converge at the sento before the evening meal. You bring the cloth for drying and the small wooden box with the tools, and you join the movement of bodies along the lane toward the bath entrance, and the evening opens into warmth and steam and the sound of the city at rest. The sento is 3 lanes from your home, close enough that you can hear it before you see it. The particular sound of many people in a confined, warm space, voice layered over voice, the slap of water, the scrape of wooden buckets on stone. You pay the entrance fee at the front, 4 mon, the standard rate for a commoner's bath in Honjo in this period, and hand your sandals to the attendant who stacks them in the wooden rack near the door. Inside, you move through the undressing room, folding your clothes with the automatic precision of a man who has done this hundreds of times, and slide open the inner door into the bath itself. The steam comes first. It is not an unpleasant sensation after a working day. The heat of the bathroom is specific, not the dry heat of a fire, but the wet, enveloping heat of water vapor, which enters the body differently. You stand for a moment, letting it settle around you before moving to the washing area. The Honjo Sento is a modest establishment, not one of the grand mixed-sex baths that the city's wealthier districts maintain, with their painted upper floors and professional entertainers, but a neighborhood bath that serves working men. The interior is functional, a long washing area with wooden buckets and ladles along one wall, and the large communal soaking tub at the far end, perhaps 4 meters across, sunk into the floor so that the water line sits at chest height on a standing man. At this hour, the bath is well attended, perhaps 20 men in various stages of washing or soaking. You recognize most of them from the neighborhood: craftsmen, small tradespeople, the kind of men who make up the working majority of Honjo. The carpenter from the Ito household is at the far end of the washing area, scrubbing his back with a straw bundle. One of the plasterers from the Mori boarding house is already in the tub, his eyes half closed, his body clearly finished with the day. You fill a bucket from the hot water tap, a wooden pipe fed from the boiler behind the wall, which the bath attendant tends continuously from the 5th hour onward, and begin washing. No one in the bathroom addresses you by your trade. This is the etiquette of the sento. Whatever you are outside, inside you are simply a man who needs to wash, and the social markers that organize the lane outside do not fully enter this room. You have heard people debate whether this represents equality or simply the temporary suspension of inequality, and you have never reached a conclusion on that question. What you know is that the bath feels different from the lane, and different from the guild meeting room, and different from the back gate at the Hashimoto house. It feels like a space where your body is simply a body, without annotation. You wash carefully. The work leaves traces that require specific attention. Under the nails, the folds of the wrists, the back of the neck where sweat and dust accumulate from carrying the pole. You have a small brush for the nails, cedar wood, that you have had for 3 years. You work through the washing with the same methodical attention you bring to the root. Efficient, thorough, not rushed. When you are clean, you move to the soaking tub. The water is hot, not uncomfortable. You have been coming to this bath for long enough that your body has calibrated to the temperature, but genuinely hot, the kind of heat that enters the muscles and changes them. You settle to the chest and feel the day's carrying weight begin to leave the back and the shoulders. The trapezius muscles where the pole rests, the specific long muscles along the spine, the deep muscles of the upper legs that have been working all day on the uneven surfaces of the lanes, all of it softens slightly in the heat. You close your eyes. The conversation in the bathroom moves around you without requiring your participation. 2 men near the far wall are discussing a dispute between neighboring shops that apparently turned loud enough yesterday to wake the block. The plasterer in the corner is asleep or close to it. The carpenter from the Ito household has moved into the tub and is washing mud from his forearms. Cold coming, the carpenter says, to no one in particular. Several men make the assenting sound that means yes, we know, we have felt it too. It is the late part of the year. The nights have been dropping to near freezing for a week, and the morning air has that edge that comes before the first serious cold of winter. You have been adjusting your morning wake time gradually, earlier to give yourself more time before the temperature gets to the point where the ground of the lanes begins to freeze and the collection hatches become difficult to open. Frozen ground is a real problem. Collection pits that sit against exterior foundation walls are vulnerable to frost. The soil around the pit contracts and the hatch covers, already subject to the warping you have been managing at the Nakamura house, become harder to move. In very cold winters, the pits themselves can develop a surface ice layer that requires breaking before the collection bucket can reach the contents. You have dealt with this. It is manageable. It is simply slower. The cold also affects the carrying weight in a different way. Cold waste is denser than warm waste. The barrels that run at a certain weight in autumn run slightly heavier in the deepest part of winter for the same volume. Over the length of a full morning route, this difference accumulates in the body. You have learned all of this from experience, and before that from your father, who described the winter route to you in the same precise practical terms in which he described everything about the work, not as complaint, but as information. This is what winter does. This is how you adjust. This is what happens if you do not adjust. You open your eyes and look at the ceiling of the bathroom. The ceiling is black with years of steam and lamp smoke, the wood darkened to the color of old iron. Someone has hung a small paper charm near the highest beam, a prayer for fire prevention, the kind sold at the Kandamyojin shrine on the other side of the river. It is a reasonable thing to pray for. Fire is the central ongoing emergency of Edo's existence. The disaster that shapes everything from building regulations to street layout to the specific character of the relationships between neighbors. I do burns. This is not an occasional catastrophe. It is a structural condition of the city. The buildings are wood, the roofs are tile or thatch. The population density is extreme. The cooking fires burn continuously in a million stoves. In a dry winter with a strong northwest wind, and Edo gets these winds, the Karakazi, the empty winds off the continental landmass, that bring cold, dry air from the north and drop the humidity to almost nothing. A single fire can move through a district in minutes. The Great Fire of Meraki in 1657 consumed more than half of Edo in 3 days. More than 100,000 people died. The city rebuilt. Then it burned again in pieces regularly. Large fires in 1668, 1682, 1703, 1717. The city always rebuilds. The rebuilding is so routine that the fires have a kind of dark humor attached to them in the local culture. Edo no Hana, the flowers of Edo. The fires are called the flowers of the city. You have thought about this from time to time. The flowers metaphor means something particular to the people who use it. It is not that they do not take fire seriously. They take it with extraordinary seriousness. The fire watchtowers, the fire brigades, the regulations about where you can and cannot store combustible materials, the prayer charms on ceilings, all of it. But the fires come anyway, and after they come the city rebuilds, and the rebuilding is so ingrained in the city's identity that destruction and reconstruction have become a single rhythm, like breathing. Your neighborhood of Honjo burned in 1717. You were 3 years old and have no memory of it. Your father told you about it, the way the fire moved down the lanes at night, faster than anyone expected, the way the river became an evacuation route as people with boats took in their neighbors, the way the neighborhood smelled for a month afterward. The house you live in was built after that fire. It is perhaps 13 years old. So is the lantern maker's room next to yours, and the carpenter's workshop on the other side, and the cento you are sitting in now. The neighborhood you know is a post-fire neighborhood, rebuilt in the style that post-fire rebuilding produces, slightly more regular than the original, slightly less dense, because the city authorities used the cleared ground to widen a few of the worst lanes by a meter or two. In 10 or 20 years it will probably burn again. This is not pessimism. It is the honest accounting of probability in a wooden city. You stay in the tub until the heat has done what heat does, and then you get out and dry and dress and retrieve your sandals and walk home in the cold evening air, which feels different after the bath. Not cold exactly, but the kind of cool that registers as pleasant against skin that has been thoroughly warmed. The evening meal is simple. The rice from the morning pot, reheated now on the brazier, has gone past the point of being good and arrived at the point of being sustaining, which is sufficient. You eat without particular attention to the eating, your mind running over the guild meeting's outcomes, and the Conda rate dispute and the approaching winter adjustments, not planning exactly but simply allowing the information to organize itself in the way that information organizes itself when you stop forcing it. Ume's paper lanterns are done for the day. The shamisen player from 3 nights ago is not playing tonight. You roll out the sleeping pallet and extinguish the lamp. The darkness of your room at night is complete. The city outside has dropped to its nighttime register, not silence, because Edo never achieves silence, but a lower sound, the sound of a city that has its eyes half closed. A dog barking somewhere to the east, the creak of a wooden wall contracting in the cold, somewhere below you, the imperceptible movement of the canal. You lie on the pallet with the quilted futon pulled up and your eyes open in the dark for the amount of time it takes for the body to understand that the day is finished and there is nothing more required of it tonight. Then sleep. The route does not stop for seasons, it adjusts. When the first hard frost of winter arrives, You wake an hour earlier than usual. Your body knows this before your mind does. You are awake in the deep dark, the kind of dark that means it is still 2 hours before any light, and the cold in the room has a specific density that tells you the temperature has dropped below a certain point. You do not have a thermometer. You do not need one. The cold speaks a language your body has been reading for 26 years. You light the lamp. The charcoal in the brazier is cold. You rebuild the fire from scratch, a task your hands manage in the near dark while your mind is still assembling itself for the day. Tinder, the flint and striker, the char cloth held carefully near the spark, the long, careful breath across the ember until it catches. You dress in the winter layers, an additional inner layer of quilted cotton, which adds warmth and adds bulk, and changes the way you move, slightly stiffer at the elbows, slightly heavier through the torso. Over this, the usual dark work layer, belted tighter than in autumn. Cloth wrapped around the lower legs and the wrists. You have seen older merchants who add a thick straw cape over everything in the coldest weather, the kind of garment that sheds rain and breaks wind and makes you look like a moving haystack. You are not there yet, but you understand why it exists. Outside, the air is still and crystalline. The ground underfoot is harder than yesterday, a slight crust of frost on the compacted earth of the lane. Your breath shows. The carrying pole has a faint cold of its own as you lift it onto your shoulders. The cypress wood, dense and smooth, has absorbed the overnight temperature, and it takes a few minutes of body heat before it stops feeling cold against the back of your neck. The first stop in winter is always the Tanaka house. But before you reach the Tanaka house, before you even clear your own lane, you stop. There is a smell in the air. Not your usual morning smell. Different. The particular smell of ash and char that you have learned in this city to locate in the air before you locate it with your eyes. You stand still for a moment. The smell is coming from the east, not strong, not the smell of something currently burning, but the cold, residual smell of something that burned recently, last night or early this morning. You turn east. 2 lanes over, visible now as your eyes adjust to the dark. There is a gap in the roofline where there was not a gap before. Not a large gap, but a gap that was not there yesterday. You shift the carrying pole on your shoulders and walk toward it. The fire was in a single building, a small residential structure, a family's home. It is not burning now. What is left is standing but wrong. The roof has partially collapsed, and the interior is a ruin of charred beams and ash. The smell is overwhelming up close, that deep wood smoke char that gets into the back of the throat and stays there. 3 or 4 neighbors are standing in the lane, looking at it. A woman is sitting on the step of the adjacent building with a blanket around her shoulders. The adjacent building is undamaged. The fire did not spread, which means either the wind was right or someone caught it early, or both. You look at the ruined building. You do not know this household. It is not on your route, but you recognize the building. You have passed it hundreds of times on the way to the Tanaka house, and some part of your route knowledge registered it as a background fact. One of the neighbors looking at the ruin is a man you recognize from the Sento. He sees you and makes the small, acknowledging movement. Not quite a nod, but the muscle precursor to a nod. When, you ask? Around the second watch, he says. The second watch is approximately midnight. anyone hurt? They got out. He pauses. The wife has burns on her hands. They're at the neighbor's. You stand for another moment. There is nothing useful you can do here. The fire is out, the family is housed, the damage is done and will be assessed and rebuilt in the way Edo assesses and rebuilds damage. The city has mechanisms for this, not government mechanisms exactly, but the social mechanisms of a neighborhood that has lived with this risk long enough to have developed automatic responses. The neighbors will bring food, the temple will register the loss. The lumber merchants will have a quote within 3 days. You turn back toward the Tanaka house. The route does not stop. But for the rest of the morning, the smell of last night's fire moves with you through the lanes, caught in the still, cold air, present as a reminder of what the city is and what it lives with. You work with it around you the way you work with all of it. The smell, the weight, the cold ground underfoot, the 43 households and 2 inns and the river landing and the farmers waiting at the end of the chain. You work through the frost. At the Mori boarding house, the collection hatch is frozen at its edges, not locked. Frozen, the wood swollen and the ice in the gap between the cover and the frame acting as a seal. You know this hatch. You know how it moves when it is not frozen, and you know from that knowledge exactly where to apply pressure to break the seal without damaging the wood. You press with the heel of your hand at the upper left corner, then the lower right, then lift. It opens. Small victories. This is the texture of winter work. At the Yamamoto household, the family's eldest daughter has left a small covered bowl near the gate, not like Suzuki Tama's regular offerings, more tentative, placed slightly to the side as if the person who left it was uncertain whether this was appropriate. You lift the cloth, pickled daikon and a piece of grilled fish. You eat it standing in the lane. The cold makes the pickled daikon sharper than it would be in summer. The grilled fish is good. Whoever cooked it used a generous hand with the salt, which in winter is what you want. You eat and look at the frost on the lane, and think about the burned building 2 blocks east and the family with the burned hands, and the way the city absorbs these things and continues. 1 million people. Every day. The load runs lighter than usual this morning. The cold has slowed the biological processes that produce the material you collect, and the lighter load is reflected in the carrying weight, which is slightly lower than an autumn morning would be. You feel this as a small relief, a small gift from the season. By the time you reach the river landing, you have 2 things you did not have yesterday, a colder spine and a clearer sense of how long this winter is likely to run. Kawamoto's son is at the dock, breaking ice from the mooring ropes with a wooden mallet. He does not look up when you arrive. He is 14 and considers all manual labor beneath his dignity, though he performs it without complaint, which is a more useful combination than the reverse would be. You begin the decanting. The canal is not frozen. The current, such as it is, keeps the surface moving, but the edges have a thin ice crust that crackles when the riverboat rocks against it. The flat-bottomed vessel sits lower in the water today, heavier with the previous loads from Fuji and the North End merchant. Kawamoto will make his upriver run this afternoon before the wind comes up. You work efficiently. The cold makes efficiency more important, not less. Standing still in this temperature for any longer than necessary is a cost the body pays. You decant, rinse, coil the ropes, check the barrel lids, reset the pole. Fuji is at the far end of the dock, working on his own load. He is wearing the straw cape today, the full haystack version, and he does not look ridiculous in it because the alternative is looking cold, and cold is worse than ridiculous. Bad night over on Kakigara-cho, you say. Fuji glances at you. I heard. The Suzumoto family. I don't know the name. Small family, Fuji says. He makes ink sticks for the calligraphy shops. She does piecework. He pauses. 2 kids. You think about this. The wife's hands, you ask. She pulled the younger kid out through the window. Fuji says it the way you say things that require no additional commentary. You finish the last barrel and set it in the morning sun to dry. Aspirate. The canal holds its cold light. The ice at the edges catches what little warmth the winter sun produces and does nothing with it. You lift your pole. The second half of the morning route runs through the frost in the same sequence it always runs, stop by stop, hatch by hatch, the familiar grammar of the route adapting to the winter the way a familiar grammar adapts to a different context, the same structure, different conditions. At the small noodle shop on the 3rd lane, the owner's wife has put a clay pot of hot water near the back gate, covered with a cloth, and you understand what it is for and you use it, pouring a small amount over the collection hatch seam to loosen the frost, and then you replace the cloth over the pot and move on. These small adjustments are what winter is. Not a single dramatic change, but 1,000 small adaptations, each one minor, each one necessary. You finish the route by mid-morning and walk home through the cold lanes. The empty barrels light on the pole, and the city goes about its business around you as it always does, and the smoke from the household fires rises into the pale winter sky, and somewhere east of you the ruined building stands open to the cold with its charred beams and its smell of last night's fire, already a fact of the neighborhood, already being absorbed into the city's endless capacity for continuation. Winter deepens the way winter deepens in a city built from wood, gradually, and then suddenly, and then as a condition you stop noticing because it has become simply the way things are. By the 2nd month of the cold season, you have made all the adjustments the season requires. The earlier wake, the extra layers, the hot water pot method for frozen hatches, which you now carry your own small clay vessel for rather than depending on the goodwill of whoever has left one near the gate, the modified carrying stride for icy lanes, shorter steps, flatter foot placement, the pole grip adjusted to give your arms more roll in balance when the ground is uncertain. You move through the winter city with the competence of someone who has moved through winter cities before. The city itself changes in winter in ways that are not only about cold. The Edo winter is a specific season with specific social rhythms. The large-scale cleaning, Susahara, the soot sweeping, happens at the end of the 12th month, when every household in the city nominally cleans its interior thoroughly, sweeping accumulated soot from the ceilings, washing the walls, airing the bedding. This ritual cleaning has the practical effect of producing a temporary surge in your collection numbers. Households disturb their collection pits during the cleaning process, and you come to find more volume than usual at the hatches. And the farmers who know this rhythm sometimes send a purchasing agent to the landing around this time to negotiate a small bonus volume at a better rate. You have negotiated this before. You are good at it now. The new year in Edo, The first day of the first month of the lunar calendar is the central holiday of the year, the moment when the city reorganizes itself around ritual and obligation. Debts are settled before the new year. Gifts are exchanged. The temples and shrines are packed with worshippers doing the Hatsumode, the first shrine visit, a movement of people through the city so large that the narrow lanes near the major temples become nearly impassable. On New Year's Day you do not collect. The route rests for 3 days, which is the customary holiday period, during which the collection pits at the 43 households and 2 inns accumulate without your attention. You use these 3 days for the same purpose everyone uses them: visiting the temple, settling your accounts for the year, sitting with the brazier in your room and letting the year arrive without requiring anything specific of you. The temple you visit is the Iko-in on the north edge of Honjo. It is a large temple with a broad precincts, used for multiple purposes throughout the year: Buddhist memorial services, sumo tournaments in the tournament season, the burial ground for the victims of the Meriki fire and other disasters. On New Year's, it is crowded and loud and full of the particular energy of a large gathering of people who are all doing the same thing at the same time, which is a different energy from the city's usual mixture of purposes. You stand before the main hall with the crowd and clap twice and bow and leave a coin in the offering box and stand for a moment in the cold. The prayer you make is the one you make every year, not for prosperity exactly, for the route to hold, for the contracts to stay, for the barrels to last another year, and the guild to remain stable, and the farmers to continue to buy, for your father's knees, which still give him trouble in the cold, for the Suzumoto family, whose name you now know, who are rebuilding in the space where the burned building stood. The Suzumoto family, the ink stick maker and his wife with the burned hands, began rebuilding in the second week after the fire. This is the speed of Edo. The lumber merchants quoted within 3 days, as you expected. The neighborhood contributed labor for the framing, as is the custom in a close-built district where everyone understands that the favor of labor given is the favor of labor received when your own turn comes. Within 10 days, the new frame was up. Within 3 weeks, the walls were closed. And now, a month after the fire, the building is nearly functional again. The wife's hands are still healing. You have seen her twice, going about her business in the lane, and the bandaging has decreased each time, which you take as a good sign. The ink stick maker's name is Suzumoto Kenji. He has a route through the neighborhood that is different from yours. He delivers to the calligraphy shops near the temple districts, and you have nodded to each other in the lane several times in the weeks since the fire, not exchanging words, but acknowledging each other in the way that people acknowledge shared proximity to a difficult event. You return from the temple in the early afternoon and eat the New Year's meal, osechi, the preserved foods that tradition requires for the holiday, which you prepared from the market in the days before. The sweet rolled egg, the dried sardines that mean a good harvest, the black beans that mean health, the lotus root with its many holes that means the ability to see the future clearly. You eat these things in the order that is considered proper, and you allow the day to be the day it is supposed to be, which is a day of pause before the year begins again. On the 4th day, you go back to the route. The hatches have been building for 3 days. The loads at every stop are heavier than usual. Your back knows this before you reach the 2nd stop, and by the 3rd stop, you have adjusted your carrying stance into the winter maximum, slightly lower center of gravity, more engagement from the thighs, The pole settled further back across your shoulders to distribute the extra weight. It is a full body adjustment, not conscious, learned. At the Suzumoto family's new building, you pause. The new structure is smaller than the old one. They rebuilt to a simpler plan, which is common after a fire, when the resources available for rebuilding are what the neighborhood contributed, rather than what years of savings might have allowed. The collection hatch is in the standard position, rear left corner, newly installed, the wood pale and smelling of fresh cedar. You had added the Suzumoto household to your route 2 weeks earlier when Kenji came to you and asked. The conversation was brief. He named the household, you named the rate, he agreed. You did not mention the fire directly. He did not mention it either. The transaction was what it was, and the fire was present in the newness of the cedar hatch and the slightly careful way he moved his left hand when he gestured, and that was sufficient. This is how the city heals, not through discussion, through the resumption of function. Winter runs its course. By the deep cold of the second month, the Karakazi, the dry continental wind, is blowing regularly from the northwest. You know this wind. You have known it since childhood, the wind that makes the city's fire wardens double their patrols and makes everyone who maintains an open flame more careful than usual. It dries the wood of the buildings to a density that burns quickly. It reduces the air humidity to the point where a spark from a cooking stove can travel meters before it dies. On the worst Karakazi days, you approach your route with a specific attention to the hatches near the cooking stoves. This is not your responsibility, technically. The collection hatches are the household's responsibility to maintain, but a collection hatch positioned near a cooking stove's ground-level vent, and some of them are in older buildings where the original design was not careful, represents a hazard that is also your problem to know about because you are at those hatches every morning and you notice what is close to what. At the Kato house, where the collection hatch sits approximately 1 meter from the kitchen stove's lower vent, you have mentioned this proximity twice. The second time you mentioned it when the weather was dry and the Karakazi was blowing and the distance between the vent and the hatch cover felt less theoretical than it does in autumn rain. The Kato family has not done anything about it. The hatch is not technically inside the building and the stove vent is not technically your concern, and both of these things are true. And the hatch is still 1 meter from the vent, and you still notice it every morning when the wind is up. You work through the Karakazi days the way you work through all the difficult conditions of the route, by adjusting your attention, by moving efficiently, by not lingering near things that do not require lingering near. In the middle of the second month, there is a week when the collections run very light across the entire route. Not 1 or 2 stops, but most of them. You register this as a pattern by the 3rd day and begin to track it deliberately. Light collections in winter usually mean one of 2 things: cold reducing the body's output, or illness reducing it. Cold, you understand. Illness is different. Illness in one household is a household matter. Illness across an entire district simultaneously is a different kind of problem. By the 4th day, you know from the neighborhood network, the Sento conversations, the market chatter, the information that Fuji carries along the route boundary, that there is a respiratory illness moving through the district. Not severe, as far as anyone can tell. Fevers and cough, mostly, lasting 5 to 10 days, not killing people but emptying a significant number of households into their sleeping pallets. The light collections make sense. You are not ill. You have not been seriously ill in 3 years. and in the 5 years before that, twice. You do not know why this is. Your father was also rarely ill, which he attributed to the work. Exposure to the material of the root builds something in the body that resists, he told you. You have no way to evaluate this claim. What you know is that you have spent 6 years in close daily contact with organic material and have remained functional. And whether this represents immunity or luck or your father's theory, you cannot say. The illness passes through the district over 3 weeks, as illnesses do, and the collections gradually return to their normal winter weight, and the root resumes its standard rhythm, and the deep cold of the 2nd month softens almost imperceptibly into the early cold of the 3rd month, which is not yet spring but is no longer the relentless freeze of the heart of winter. You notice this first in the ground. The lanes have been frozen or near frozen since early winter. The packed earth holds the cold and returns it each night, so that even on days when the sun is present and the air temperature is above freezing, the ground stays hard and cold underfoot, radiating the memory of the cold nights. But in the 3rd month, around the time of the 2nd new moon, the ground begins to yield slightly. You feel it through the soles of your work sandals, a barely perceptible give, a slight softness at the surface of the packed earth. Not mud, not yet, just the first suggestion of moisture returning to the soil as the frost retreats from the top layer. It is a small thing, but your feet have been reading the ground every morning for 6 years, and you know what this means. Spring is not here, but it is no longer as far away as it was. The farmers know this too. Around this time of year, the purchasing agents from the agricultural villages begin to be more present at the river landing, not negotiating in a formal sense, but checking in, assessing the quality and volume of the winter stockpiles, making the preliminary calculations that will determine how much shimogo they need for the spring planting. The spring planting is when the shimogo trade runs at its peak. The farmers apply the concentrated waste to the paddies and fields in the weeks before planting, working it into the soil at a depth and density that the season requires. The timing is specific, not too early because the spring floods would wash it away, and not too late because the soil needs time to absorb it before the seedlings go in. The farmers know this timing with the precision of people whose livelihoods depend on getting it exactly right. You have approximately 6 weeks between now and the peak delivery season. This means your winter stockpile, the material you have been delivering to the landing through the cold months, which Kawamoto has been holding in the large storage vessels at the upriver depot rather than distributing immediately, is now a relatively valuable asset. You do not own it anymore exactly. You sold it when you delivered it, but your reputation is attached to the quality of what you delivered. And quality in shimogo is something the farmers assess in the spring when they work it into the soil and observe what it does. You have maintained quality through the winter by the same means you always maintain quality, by knowing your root, by understanding which households eat what and how that affects the material, by managing the delivery timing so that nothing sits too long and degrades beyond usefulness. A good spring assessment means the farmers' purchasing agents remember your name in a positive way, and that memory affects the negotiation in the following quarter, and the quarter after that, and every quarter for as long as you run this route. Your reputation is the root. The root is your reputation. They are the same thing. held in the minds of 43 households, and 2 inns, and 3 farming villages, and 1 river trader, and 17 guild members, and 1 guild elder with his eyes half closed in a cedar-smelling room near the Itai Bridge. You tend it the way you tend the fire in your brazier, carefully, with attention, because losing it is easier than building it, and building it again takes longer than you have. Of Wefer. The 3rd month arrives with a particular quality of light, not the flat white light of winter, but something slightly warmer at the edges, slightly less absolute. You stand at the river landing in the early morning, the empty barrels beside you, and look at the water. The canal is moving more than it did in winter. The thaw has raised the water level slightly, and the current, such as it is in the Tatekawa, has a slightly different cadence, not stronger exactly, but more present, as if the water has woken from something. Kawamoto is at the dock, adjusting the river vessel's moorings. He sees you and nods. He is a man of approximately 50 who has been running this route on the water for as long as you have been running it on land, and longer. He knows the farmers. He knows the guild. He knows the rhythm of the Shimugo trade in the way that someone who sits at the center of a system knows the system, not from studying it, but from operating it daily for many years. Spring run in 3 weeks, he says. Not a question, an assessment. Maybe 4, you say, if the 3rd month stays cold. He considers this. He looks at the water. 3 weeks, he says again. You respect this judgment. He is usually right about the water timing. The river tells him things that the land does not tell you. You finish the decanting and walk back through the lanes toward your neighborhood. The morning is cold but clear, the kind of cold that feels different from winter cold, sharper and more temporary, a cold that knows it is on its way out. The smoke from the household fires rises straight up in the still air, no wind to bend it. The lane cats are out, 2 of them sitting in a patch of early sun on a south-facing wall, their eyes half closed, applying the same logic to the available warmth that you applied to the bath a month ago. You pass the Suzumoto building. The new cedar has begun to take its first weathering, a slight darkening at the grain lines where moisture and dust have started to work on it, beginning the slow transformation from new wood to old wood that will continue for the next 30 years. In a season or 2, it will look like the rest of the neighborhood. The fire will be invisible in the structure. You pass the Nakamura house. The hatch cover has been replaced. New wood, properly fitted, the edges straight. You checked it 3 weeks ago and noted it without comment to the household, because the point was not to comment on it, but for it to be done, and it had been done. You pass the Goto house. The mid-morning collection schedule has been running for 2 months. You have adjusted the eastern section of the route to accommodate it. The adjustment costs you approximately 15 extra minutes, 3 mornings a week, which the 50 mon per quarter covers. Goto Sachi meets you at the gate sometimes when the timing is right, not to supervise, but because she is the kind of person who is often outside at mid-morning, managing the household's external affairs. She nods at you. You nod at her. The transaction is complete. You are home by mid-morning. The room is slightly warmer than it has been since autumn. Not warm, not yet, but less cold, the way a place becomes less cold when the structural temperature of the season has shifted by a few degrees. You sit on the tatami without lighting the brazier and drink the morning tea and feel the room's temperature as a sign. 3 weeks, Kawamoto said. You sit with the tea and think about the spring planting and the farmers and the purchasing agents and the rate negotiations that will begin in earnest when the thaw is fully underway. You think about the Conda Guild's rate increase proposal, which has apparently been moving through the Federation's deliberation process all winter and is now near a decision point. You think about the Honjo Guild's position, which Otogenbei has maintained as cautious, willing to consider a modest increase in Federation solidarity, unwilling to move so far that it disrupts the long-term relationships with the agricultural regions. You think about your father, whose knees are worse this winter than last. He lives 4 lanes from you, in a room that is slightly smaller than yours, with a neighbor on one side who plays a flute in the evenings badly, and a neighbor on the other side who keeps a dog that barks at irregular intervals. You visit him on guild meeting days, usually. You bring food when you have surplus. He gives you, periodically, small pieces of advice about the route that are sometimes useful and sometimes outdated. Because the route he ran is not exactly the route you run. The city has changed, some households have moved, new buildings have gone in, but the underlying logic of the advice is often sound even when the specific details no longer apply. Last month he told you, in the way he sometimes tells you things that have been sitting in him for a while, the root is not what you collect, the root is what you know. You have been thinking about this since. What you know is extensive. You know it in your body and in your mind and in the specific calibrated attention you bring to the lanes every morning. You know 43 households and 2 inns and the particular texture of each one. Which ones are reliable, which ones are erratic, which ones treat you as invisible, and which ones leave food near the gate. You know the soil conditions of the lanes, and the structural conditions of the hatches and the likely trajectory of disputes before they become disputes. You know the guild's records and the farmers' needs and the river timing and the seasonal rhythms of a city that has been producing this same material in the same volumes for 100 years. Your father ran this route for 30 years before his knees gave out. You have run it for 6. In 30 years you will know things you do not yet know. The city will change around you, and the route will change with it, and your knowledge will adapt to those changes, the way water finds the shape of what contains it. The route is what you know. You finish the tea. Outside, the sun has moved to the point where it reaches the lower edge of your window shutter, sending a thin line of late winter light across the tatami floor. You look at it for a moment. It falls at a slightly different angle than it did in the deep winter, a few degrees higher, tracking the slow seasonal shift of the sun's path over the city. In 3 weeks, possibly 4, the spring planting season will begin. The purchasing agents will come to the river landing. Kawamoto will start his daily runs upriver. The fields outside the city will receive what you have delivered through the cold months, and in the summer the rice will grow, and in the autumn the harvest will come in, and the city will eat. And you will go back to the hatches in the morning, and the river landing at midday, and the guild meeting on the 14th, and the cento in the evening, and the route will run as it has always run. Wasa. The light on the tatami floor moves slowly. You set down the cup. The day is not finished, but this part of it, the morning's weight lifted, the spring beginning its approach, this part settles quietly. Kawamoto was right. 3 weeks after he stood at the dock and said 3 weeks, the first purchasing agent from the nearest Musashino village appears at the river landing. It is a Tuesday morning by the Western reckoning. that Edo does not use by the lunar calendar. It is the 7th day of the 3rd month, and the air has that particular quality that arrives in the brief window between winter and the full warmth of spring, when everything is clear and cold and still, and the light has a precision to it that the other seasons do not. The purchasing agent is the compact man you know, Taro something, the one who weighs carefully and counts twice. He arrives in a small riverboat with 2 farmhands, and the 3 of them begin the inspection of the stockpiled material in Kawamoto's riverside storage with the focused attention of men who are making decisions that will affect the yield of many fields. You are at the landing when he arrives. You are not there to negotiate. That is guild business, handled through Ota Genbei and the Federation's established rate schedule. You are there to deliver your morning load, and the timing is coincidence or close enough to coincidence that it doesn't matter. The purchasing agent looks at you when you set down your load. "Honjo route?" he asks. "Honjo," you confirm. He nods, not a greeting exactly, an acknowledgement that the origin of the material matters to him and he is tracking it. The farms that use Honjo Shimogo have results they can measure and compare to previous years, and those measurements are part of how the purchasing agent does his job. "Winter quality held," he says, also not a question. "It held," you say. He nods again and goes back to his inspection. This exchange, conducted in perhaps 15 words, is the closest thing to a professional compliment you will receive this season. You recognize it as such. You lift your empty barrels and walk back up the dock ramp without looking back. The spring delivery season runs for approximately 6 weeks, from the 7th day of the 3rd month to the middle of the 4th month, when the rice seedlings go into the paddies. During this period, Kawamoto runs his river vessel upriver every day instead of every 2 or 3 days, and the loading at the dock is more urgent and more continuous, and the guild coordinates the landing rotation so that no merchant is waiting more than 1 morning per week for his turn at the dock. For you, this means that the spring route runs harder than any other season, not heavier loads. In fact, the spring loads are sometimes lighter than winter loads, as the warming weather increases the pace of biological processes and the collection pits turn over faster. But the delivery pressure is higher. There is a window in which the farmers need the material delivered, and the window closes, and everything in the 6 weeks before that window closes has the character of purposeful urgency. You wake earlier, you move faster, you make fewer adjustments mid-route, deferring the small negotiations and maintenance checks to the afternoon, and completing the core collection as efficiently as the lanes allow. The guild is busier. Ota Genbei convenes 2 additional meetings in the 3rd month, short ones, focused on coordination rather than policy, to manage the landing rotation and address the 2 or 3 inevitable conflicts that arise when 17 merchants are all trying to deliver more frequently in a compressed window. You attend both meetings. You say almost nothing at either one. You listen to the coordination decisions and update your mental schedule and leave. At the river landing, in the peak week of the spring delivery, you see Fuji every morning for 7 days straight. This is unusual. Your landing rotations normally separate you by a day or 2. But the peak season compresses everyone's schedule, and the dock has, by informal consent, simply expanded its operating hours to accommodate it. You and Fuji work side by side for these 7 mornings without discussing anything in particular, which is its own kind of comfortable arrangement. You have known Fuji for 6 years. You know the approximate shape of his life, similar to yours in structure, different in detail. He has a wife and a daughter in a room 2 lanes from his. His route is in the southern section of Honjo, heavier in commercial accounts, lighter in residential. He is slightly better at the contract negotiations than you are, and slightly worse at the physical work. And you have arrived at a relationship based on these complementary assessments without either of you having discussed it. On the 7th morning of the peak week, after you have both finished decanting and are standing in the early spring sun waiting for the dock to clear enough to rinse your barrels, Fuji says, "Kanda settled." You look at him. "The rate increase," he says. "The Federation agreed to 4% across the board, all districts." 4%, not the 8% Kanda originally wanted, but not 0. A compromise that, in Ota Genbei's framing at the last meeting, represented the Federation finding the price that the agricultural regions would accept without looking for alternative suppliers from outside the city. "When does it take effect?" you ask. "Summer collection," Fuji says. You calculate this without effort. The summer collection means your quarterly payment from the Musashino purchasing agents will be 4% higher against your root's volume. That is approximately 120 mon per quarter. Not transformative, but not nothing. Over a year, it is roughly the cost of 4 months of guild dues. "Ota-san must be satisfied," you say. "He said it was a reasonable outcome," Fuji says, which in Ota Genbei's vocabulary means he is satisfied. The dock clears. You rinse your barrels. You coil the ropes. The spring morning continues around you in its particular precision. The spring planting happens over 2 weeks in the 4th month. You know it has begun because the river traffic changes. The agricultural boats that have been coming downriver to collect stockpiled shimogo now reverse, going upriver loaded, and the Sumida and its feeder canals have a purposeful quality to them. All the boats moving with intention, the city and its agricultural hinterland exchanging the things they need from each other at the pace that the season requires. You do not see the fields where your deliveries end up. You have never seen them. The Musashino Plain is perhaps 10 to 20 kilometers from where you stand at the Tatekawa landing, and in your life there has been no occasion that required you to travel there. But you understand the fields abstractly, the way you understand the inside of the Nakamura house, not by having been inside it, but by the evidence that reaches you every morning through the collection hatch. The rice goes in. The fields receive what they need. The city continues. Spring deepens into early summer, and the city changes its register again. Summer in Edo is extraordinary and exhausting. The heat and humidity arrive simultaneously, and they do not lift. The city that seemed manageable in the clean cold of winter becomes something else in the summer. 1,000,000 bodies in close proximity, all the organic processes accelerated, the smells of everything amplified by heat, the wooden buildings absorbing the sun and radiating it back through the night so that the cool of the morning is relative rather than real. You adjust. The summer route runs earlier than any other season. You are moving before the first light, working in the pre-dawn dark that in winter felt like hardship and in summer feels like mercy. The pre-dawn is the only part of the summer day that is genuinely cool. By the time the sun is fully up, the work should be as close to finished as possible. You drink more water in summer. This is simple and obvious, and nonetheless requires active management, because when you are carrying heavy loads through hot lanes, your body's water demand runs ahead of your thirst. And thirst in this context is a lagging indicator. Your father told you this, and you have verified it in your own body over 6 summers. By the time you feel thirsty in summer, you are already behind on water. You carry a small ceramic flask on the summer route. Cold well water, filled before you leave the house. You drink from it at specific stops, the 4th stop, the 8th stop, the 12th, not waiting for thirst to instruct you. This is one of the small disciplines of the work that exist below the level of conscious decision, maintained by habit long enough that violating them requires more effort than observing them. The summer loads run heavy and warm and immediate. There is a speed requirement to summer collection that the other seasons do not have. What you carry must reach the river landing while the temperature is still manageable, because material that sits too long in summer heat degrades in ways that reduce its value to the farmers and create problems at the landing. Kawamoto's son, the disdainful 14-year-old, has become 15 and slightly less disdainful over the winter, and in summer he is actually useful, quick with the decanting, efficient with the rinse water, demonstrating the grudging competence of a young person who has decided that doing things well is less annoying than doing them badly. You finish your morning routes in summer before the midday heat. The afternoons are for the lighter work, the shorter afternoon collection, the administrative tasks, the maintenance, done in whatever shade the narrow lanes provide, moving slowly and deliberately in the way that heat demands. The sento in summer is different from the sento in winter. The communal bath is cooler, not heated to the winter maximum, because the ambient temperature makes the full winter heat intolerable, and the social atmosphere is slightly more expansive. Men stay longer in summer because there is nowhere cooler to go. Conversations run longer. The particular civic life of the sento, the news exchange, the neighborhood argument, the gradual assembly of a picture of what is happening in the district, is more active in summer than winter. You learn in the sento one evening in the 5th month that the Hashimoto sake shop has been sold. The man who tells you is a neighbor of the Hashimoto shop, a fabric merchant with a route that takes him past the shop's front entrance most mornings. The sale is not surprising in itself. Small retail businesses change hands. What matters to you is the implications for the collection contract. You go to the Hashimoto shop the next morning, at the front door this time rather than the back gate, at a slightly later hour when the new owner might be accessible. The new owner is a woman in her 40s, compact and efficient-looking, who purchased the shop from Hashimoto Kenji after he decided to retire to his wife's family's property in Ueno. The wife whose mother was sick, who has apparently now recovered, and whose family apparently has property Hashimoto found more attractive than running a sake shop in Honjo. The new owner's name is Endo Yuki. She runs the shop with her teenage son and a young man from her home province who handles the heavy deliveries. You introduce yourself and explain the collection contract. She listens to the explanation with the focused attention of someone taking inventory of what a business involves. When you finish, she asks 2 questions. What is the rate, and when do you come? You tell her both. She says, the rate is standard for the district. Standard, you confirm. Then the contract continues, she says. This is the cleanest transfer of a client account you have ever conducted. Hashimoto Kenji, for all his locked gates and rate renegotiations, was replaced by someone who simply asked whether the terms were reasonable and, finding them so, continued. You consider this an improvement. Summer moves through the city with its usual implacable heat. The festival season arrives in the 6th and 7th months. The Oban festival in the 7th month, the great memorial occasion when the spirits of the dead are welcomed back for 3 days, and the city fills with lantern light and the particular sound of bon odore drums that carry through the summer nights. You do not have family to welcome back. Your mother died when you were 7, your younger brother in an illness when he was 3. Your father is still living, which means the only spirit lantern you would need to set out is for your brother and your mother. And you do this on the first night of Oban, placing the small lantern at the edge of your doorstep in the manner that is considered correct, and standing for a moment in the summer night air and thinking about your brother, who you remember only as a specific weight in your arms and a particular sound of breathing, both of which are fully and irrecoverably gone. Then you go inside and sleep, because the morning comes regardless. The summer eases into autumn. This is the transition you know best, because autumn is the season when you started the route. Your father passed it to you in the early autumn of the year you were 20, walking the route beside you for 2 weeks while his knees still allowed it, and the smell of the autumn lanes, the particular cool that arrives in the 8th month on the morning air, carries in it the memory of beginning. The route is 6 years old now, in your hands. It has been worn into your body and your mind the way a carried pole wears its groove, gradually, specifically, leaving a mark that is both damage and adaptation, both the cost of the work and the body's answer to that cost. You walk the autumn lane with the carrying pole balanced across the familiar groove. The Tanaka household, the Mori boarding house, the Hashimoto shop, Endo Yuki's shop now, the collection hatch maintained and accessible every morning without exception, the Nakamura house with its properly fitted hatch cover, the Goto house on the mid-morning schedule, the Suzumoto building, its cedar walls weathered now to a color that matches its neighbors, the ink stick maker's wife moving freely in the lane without bandages, the Suzuki Inn, where Tama's covered dish is beside the gate, the river landing, where Kawamoto's vessel rocks in the morning current, the farmer's fields, invisible to you but present in the logic of everything you do, the guild, with its records and its boundaries and its elder who resolves disputes through specific dates and boundary language, and the slow application of accumulated knowledge, the Sento, with its steam and its heat and the civic noise of the neighborhood, your father, 4 lanes away, whose knees ache in the cold and who gave you the route and the knowledge that the route is what you know. All of this is yours in the sense that daily maintenance over many years makes something yours. Not ownership, not possession, something quieter than those words and more durable. You are 26 years old. You have been doing this for 6 years. You will do it for 30 more, or 40, or however many years the body allows. The route will change as the city changes. Buildings will burn and be rebuilt. Clients will move and be replaced. The guild will negotiate and mediate and record. The farmers will plant and harvest and come to the landing with their careful eyes and their twice-counted coins. The city will continue to be what it is, 1 million people, the largest human settlement on Earth in the year 1730, maintained in part by the work of 17 men in one district of one part of the city, who carry the weight of the morning route on their shoulders every day without exception, and by the thousands of others like them in the other districts, all of them moving through the pre-dawn lanes of Edo in the dark, sustaining without being seen, essential without being acknowledged, keeping the city alive the way the deep roots of a tree keep it standing, invisibly and completely. You finish the autumn morning route and walk home through the lanes that are yours. The carrying pole rests on your shoulder. The barrels are empty. The city is fully awake around you now, making its full volume noise, the market at its peak and the craftsmen at their work, and the children in the lanes, and the smoke rising from 10,000 stoves. You walk through all of it. You turn into your lane. You set the pole against the wall outside your door, where it always stands. You go inside. Afna whispered. The room is as you left it. Asma. The tatami is cool under your feet. A whisper. The morning light comes in through the shuttered window in a thin line across the floor. You sit. The day stretches out in front of you with its ordinary requirements, the afternoon route, the guild dues to settle before the end of the month, a visit to your father. But not yet. For now, just the room. The thin line of light on the tatami. The distant sound of the city, which is always there and which you have stopped hearing as a sound and started hearing as the texture of the place you live. You have been awake since before the dark. You have carried more than your own weight across the lanes of Honjo. You have kept the contracts and maintained the relationships and delivered the load and come home. The tatami holds you. The room is warm enough. Let the sounds of the city recede. Let the light on the floor be what it is. No. There is nothing more required of you now. The route will be there tomorrow. The lane will be there. The gate will be there. The morning will come as the morning always comes, and you will rise and dress and lift the pole and go. But that is tomorrow. For now, just this, just the room, just the quiet. Thank you for spending this night in Edo. If this kind of storytelling helps you rest, please consider subscribing to Quiet History at Bedtime, liking this video, and turning on the bell so you never miss a new episode. This channel is still new, and every subscriber genuinely matters. Next time, we step into another life, another morning, another world that history almost forgot. Stay close. Sleep well.